Chapter 1. The War Room. The room was dim, its flickering lanterns casting jagged shadows along the cracked stone walls. The rebels had no throne, no grand halls, only this makeshift war room, a gathering space beneath the ruins of an old courthouse, hidden from the prying eyes of the butcher's forces. Dell stood at the head of the table, his coat draped over his chair like a second skin, his piercing blue eyes scanning the faces of those who had chosen to fight beside him. Flare, ever sharp and unwavering, leaned against the table, her short blonde hair streaked with red like the war she thrived in. Silas, silent as always, kept his truncheon resting within reach, his scarred face unreadable. And then, the new blood. They had gathered fighters, survivors, those who had lost too much to remain passive. Among them sat Marrow, a skeletal man who had once scavenged in the slums before the rebellion found him. His wiry frame held the cunning necessary to navigate the city's underbelly. Across from him, Rook, a former enforcer under the butcher's rule, now bearing the scars of betrayal and a hatred deep enough to carve his own warpath. At the far end, leaning back with calculating patience, Vess, a woman who spoke little but killed without hesitation, her twin blades resting at her sides. The map of the City of Bones was laid out before them, its streets carved into parchment, its strongholds marked in red. Dell exhaled, pressing his palms against the table.
"We take him down before he sees us coming,"
he said, his voice low, weighted.
"This isn't just war, it's a clean break. We tear out the roots, burn down everything he's built, and make sure his reign dies with him."
Flare nodded, tracing a finger along the guard barracks, the supply stronghold, and finally, the throne hall, where the butcher would wait, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath him.
"We hit the barracks first,"
she said.
"We cut his forces down before they even realize they're fighting a war. Then the supply chains. They'll starve before they can fight back."
Silas grunted his approval, while Marrow tapped the edge of the map, eyes narrowing.
"And if he finds us first?"
Marrow asked. Dell's gaze darkened.
"Then we don't run."
Silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of what was to come. The City of Bones had spent years under the butcher's rule. By sunrise, that rule would end. Chapter 2. The Night of Fire. The City of Bones was a kingdom carved in cruelty, but tonight, beneath the shroud of darkness, it would become a battlefield. Dell stood at the edge of the war room, the scent of burning lanterns thick in the air, the distant hum of rebellion vibrating through every soul in the room. His rebels were ready, divided into small groups, each with a singular purpose: to cripple the butcher's rule. The plan was simple. The execution would be merciless. The strike teams. Flare led the assault on the supply stronghold. Without food, without weapons, the butcher's forces would starve before they could fight back. Silas took his fighters into the streets, targeting the elite enforcers who kept fear alive. Take out the fear. Take out their grip on the city. Marrow and Rook. Their mission was quieter, deadlier. Sabotage the gates, control the exits, ensure the butcher had nowhere to run. And Dell? He led the main force straight for the barracks, the heart of the butcher's army. Steel whispered against leather as blades were drawn, voices hushed under the weight of what was to come. The city was still, waiting. Then the first fire rose. The rebellion began. The barracks' siege. The barracks were fortified, thick stone walls protecting the soldiers within. Dell's team approached like ghosts, shadows slipping through the alleyways until they stood before the outer gates. Then, silence shattered. A signal flare, flare's mark, ripped through the night sky, a burning streak of rebellion. Del struck first. He tore through the first guard before the alarm could ring out, his blade slicing clean, fast. His rebels followed, pouring into the barracks like a wave of vengeance, catching the butcher's soldiers off guard, out of position, weak in their arrogance. Steel clashed. Blood painted the stone. The barracks burned as the butcher's forces crumbled. And by the time the night reached its darkest hour, Del's group stood victorious. The rebellion had claimed its first victory, but they were not finished. As the flames devoured the barracks, as the rebels regrouped under the cloak of smoldering ruin, Del turned his gaze toward the final confrontation. A massive steel door loomed ahead, the entrance to the throne room, and behind it, the butcher waited. Chapter 3: The Butcher's Throne. The steel doors groaned as Del pushed them open, their weight resisting him as if they knew what awaited inside. The throne room, blood-soaked and towering, stretched before him, a monument to power built on brutality. At its center, seated atop his grotesque throne of bone, was the butcher. His most loyal guards flanked him, hulking figures clad in armor pieced together from the remains of fallen foes. Men who had killed and devoured alongside their master, who had indulged in the same madness that had once claimed Del. Outside, the battle raged. The rebels held the line, Flare, Silas, and the others cutting down the butcher's remaining forces, ensuring that no one would interrupt what was about to unfold here. This was Del's fight alone. The butcher's last war. Del moved first, a blur of steel, of force, of raw fury that had nothing left to restrain it. His blade met the first guard's throat before the man could even react, a swift, unforgiving execution. The second came at him faster, swinging with strength that could shatter bone, but Del ducked, stepped inside his guard, and drove his dagger into the soft space beneath his ribs. A twist, a rip, a broken scream. The third wasn't human. Not truly. Twisted limbs, black-veined skin stretched unnaturally over muscle, a mutation, a servant of the hunger, its body shifting with each movement as if reality itself refused to hold it in place. Del tore through it, his blade carving clean through its deformities, watching as its twisting form collapsed into itself. A creature undone by its own corruption. Only the butcher remained, the truth beneath the flesh. The butcher grinned. His teeth were red, his eyes bright with amusement, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along.
You finally see it, don't you?
He mused, rising from his throne.
What you are, what I am, what we were always meant to be.
Then he moved, faster than he should have. The butcher's misshapen spine curled, his body shifting with an unnatural fluidity, his limbs elongating in bursts of grotesque strength. His blows were like living weapons, his tendons pulling like things that had minds of their own. But Del did not falter. He met every strike, every attack, his scars burning, his body refusing to yield. This wasn't just survival. This wasn't just war. This was Del carving out the last piece of himself that had been shackled to the butcher's rule. And when the final opening came, when the butcher overreached, lunging for Del's throat, Del caught him. With all the force in his body, with every ounce of rage that had lived inside him since he had first touched the idol, he ripped. Bone snapped, flesh tore. The butcher's spine came free, his monstrous body crumbling, his form twisting even in death, revealing the truth that had lurked beneath his skin all along. He had never been entirely human, and now he was nothing at all. The war, was won. Dell stood over the corpse, holding the twisted, misshapen spine, a relic of something unnatural, something that had lived inside the butcher for far too long. The throne of bone no longer held power. The city of bones had been freed. But the true war, the war against the darkness, had only just begun. Chapter 4. The City Reforged. The City of Bones was never meant to be saved. For years, it had been the butcher's dominion, a kingdom of brutality where survival came at the cost of surrender, to power, to hunger, to cruelty. His rule had defined it, shaping its people into either victims or executioners. Now, under Dell's control, it had to become something else. A fortress, a weapon, a bastion against what lurked beyond the walls. The walls and the ruins. Rebuilding was not about beauty, it was about survival. The city's walls, scarred by battles worn by time, had to be reinforced. Dell sent teams of builders, fighters, and engineers to seal cracks, to strengthen stone with iron, to patch the vulnerabilities the butcher had never cared to fix. Old war-torn ruins, once abandoned, were claimed. Watchtowers were erected, vantage points to spot enemies before they reached the city's gates. Barricades were reshaped, not to keep citizens trapped inside, but to keep the coming war out. And below the streets, hidden tunnels, once used for smuggling and escape, were repurposed. Paths for movement, for secrecy, for survival when the war against the darkness truly began. The people, warriors forged in ruin. Not all survivors were fighters, not yet. Dell knew that fear still gripped the city. The butcher's shadow was long, and even though his throne had been shattered, his legacy remained. It wasn't enough to free them. He had to make them ready. Flair took command of training, a warrior first, a leader second. She pushed them, shaped them, broke their weaknesses so they could withstand what was coming. Silas led the new guard, training enforcers who would uphold order through strength, but not through cruelty. He had seen too much of that already. And then there were the ones who had been broken too deeply, the ones who could not fight, not yet. They took roles as medics, smiths, strategists. Everyone had a place in this war, because this war would not spare anyone. The butcher's remnants, shadows that should not exist. The butcher was dead. But not all his creations died with him. In the dark corners of the city, twisted creatures lingered, mutations born from the butcher's rule, remnants of his indulgence in the hunger's influence. Some were warped soldiers, their bodies still shifting, still growing, even in death. Others were things that had once been human, now nothing more than flesh-woven horrors that refused to die. The worst of them came at night, emerging from places long abandoned where the hunger had rooted itself too deeply. And Dell knew, if they were not purged, they would consume everything. The unseen presence, the darkness watches. Even as the city was reforged, something lingered. Dell felt it, a tension in the air, an unease that couldn't be explained. Whispers in the streets, some swearing they had seen things watching them, shadows that moved in ways they shouldn't. The city was free from the butcher, but not from the war that was coming. Chapter 5. The Throne Beyond Time. There was no sun in this place, no wind, no life, no sky. Only the grey tower, standing alone atop its blackened hill, where even time dared not touch. The darkness sat upon its throne, its form shifting between recognition and oblivion, a presence more than a being, a shape more than flesh. It had waited for eons, watching, growing stronger as the world around it rotted, as civilizations collapsed, as power bent itself toward inevitability. Here, in its dominion, it had learned patience. And now, something had changed. Del had shattered the monolith, defied the hunger, broken free from the pull that should have consumed him. The darkness did not rage. It did not fear. It simply watched, because it knew. Every rebellion fades. Every resistance breaks. Every name, no matter how defiant, is eventually swallowed. Del's war was only beginning. And when the time came, when the city he reforged fell beneath the weight of what truly awaited, he would return, not as a warrior, not as a savior, but as a sacrifice. The Grey Tower is now woven into this mythos, an eternal force threading through every era, every reality, every world. It exists beyond time, beyond recognition, always present, always waiting. And the darkness, this ancient force, draws from it, shaping itself through eons of decay. Next, we shift back to Del's forces, unaware of the entity preparing for them, building their armies for a war far greater than just the City of Bones. Should Chapter 6 focus on creatures beginning to appear, mutated remnants of the hunger responding to Del's defiance? Or should it lean into political tension within the city, showing cracks forming among the rebels, doubts of whether they are truly prepared for war? Either way, the future is coming fast. Chapter 6: The Unseen Scourge. The City of Bones had begun to heal. Walls had been rebuilt, soldiers trained, order forged from chaos. But deep within the forgotten corners, in the places light no longer touched, something stirred. The darkness had sent its first horrors, creeping into the city without warning, without sound. Creatures unlike anything the wasteland had ever seen, twisted beasts that had lurked beneath reality itself, waiting for the moment to emerge. And now, they were here. The hollow tendril vermin. They came first, crawling through rotted foundations, slipping between walls, twisting through alleyways, their tendril-like appendages writhing as they searched. They were small, rat-like in body, but grotesque in form, their heads hollow, empty, nothing but clustered holes, as if something had scooped away their eyes, noses, everything that should have made them recognizable. They didn't move like rats. They moved like a plague, spreading unnaturally, not through the streets, but through the fabric of the city itself, slipping through spaces that should not exist. And when they found their prey, those tendrils did not grip, they burrowed. They did not kill immediately. They infested the oil walkers. And then the soldiers arrived. They did not lumber. They did not charge. They simply existed, shifting through angles of reality where they could not be fully seen, where the mind struggled to grasp their presence. Black, oil-like creatures, humanoid but endless, their bodies flowing, stretching, vanishing if looked at from the wrong angle. They could not be cut. They could not be pierced, and the only way to destroy them was fire. Even then, they did not burn like flesh. They screamed, the sound unnatural, like something too far removed from existence to know how to die properly. And when the first of them appeared in the streets, the rebels did not understand what they were facing. Not yet. Chapter 7: The First Deaths. The City of Bones was learning that victory had come too easily. The butcher was dead. The streets were reforged. But something had already begun to take his place. Something older, quieter, patient. Del moved through the city, his boots crunching against loose stone as the night swallowed the streets in its usual shroud. He had been hunting through the ruins for hours. Something had been wrong since the city had fallen under his rule. People were disappearing. Shadows stretched where they should not. And then he found it. A hollow tendril creature, writhing in the filth of an abandoned alley, its tendrils twisting as if searching for something unseen. Its head, empty, hollow, just a mess of clustered holes, turned toward him. It did not run. It did not react. It simply existed, waiting, watching. Del grabbed it before hesitation could sink in, his fingers wrapping around its small, sickly frame, and he squeezed. The body collapsed inward, not like flesh, but like something far less real, far less grounded in existence. And from its corpse, mist rose, dark, shifting, moving with unnatural purpose. It did not linger. It drifted north, away from the city, as if it knew it had somewhere else to be. Del watched, his breath slow, measured. This was not just a creature. This was a warning. The alleyway killings. Elsewhere in the city, the night was deepening. 4 men walked through the side alleys, their voices low, their steps cautious. One of them held a torch, the flame flickering as the buildings swallowed the moonlight. Then they heard it. A sound, not a whisper, not breathing. Something else. Something wrong. They barely had time to react. The first 2 were dead before their minds could comprehend what had happened. Limbs severed, torsos collapsing inward, silence replacing the space where their screams should have been. The third, gripping his truncheon, swung it hard, cracking the weapon against the thing's shifting body, only for it to pass through like mist, like oil slipping between realities. And then, he too was gone. The last man fell, the torch dropping beside him, his body scrambling backward, desperate to escape. The creature reached for him, its formless arms stretching toward his chest, toward his throat, toward the final breath he would ever take. But then it touched the flame, and screamed. Not a human scream, not an animal's cry. Something else, something that had never been meant to feel pain, something that had never been meant to die. The fire consumed it, and as it burned, it folded inward, vanishing into the void from which it had come. The man did not move. He simply stared at the torch, at the weapon that had unknowingly saved him, as the truth settled in. These things could not be harmed by blades. They could not be harmed by brute force. But fire? Fire could kill them. Chapter 8. The Burning Night. A week had passed since the first horror revealed itself. A week since Del had crushed the hollow tendril creature, watching its mist drift north, carrying whispers of something far worse. A week since a citizen had learned, by sheer accident, the one truth that saved him. Fire could kill them. The city had adapted. Torches lined the streets. Matches were kept in pockets like lifelines. Even the most desperate scavengers had found ways to refuel rusted lighters, stuffing them with cloth and straw, anything that could be ignited when the time came, because they knew something was coming. And tonight, it arrived. The attack begins. The sky was choked, the moon veiled behind unnatural darkness, shadows stretching farther than they should. Then came the first sound. A shriek, not like an animal, not like a dying man. Something else. Something from the place where the sun refused to rise. They poured into the city, the hollow tendrils slipping from the ruins, crawling through streets in unnatural silence, their hollow, empty heads tilting as they searched. And behind them, the oil walkers. Not charging, not marching, just existing, shifting between angles of reality, their blackened forms flickering, stretching, moving without motion. They could not be stopped. Not by steel, not by strength. Only by flame. The city's struggle. The first fires rose immediately. Citizens who had once hidden now stood, torches lifted, makeshift flamethrowers built from oil-soaked rags clutched in trembling hands. The rebels fought alongside them, knives meeting flesh where it could be harmed, flames licking the edges of the oil walkers, burning through the creatures that had never known pain before tonight. But the battle was not clean. The hollow tendrils infested, slipping into homes, into cracks in the walls, burrowing where no human eye could reach. And even though the city had prepared, even though the knowledge had spread, fire alone was not enough. Because this was not a simple invasion. This was only the beginning, the turning point. Del stood at the heart of the chaos, his blade slick with gore, his lungs filled with the scent of burning bodies, not human, but something far worse. Flare fought beside him, her dagger quick, efficient, her movements sharpened by a lifetime of war. Silas crushed one of the creatures beneath his truncheon, but even he knew fire was the only weapon that mattered tonight. And then Del saw it, far beyond the walls, past the battle, past the burning streets. Something moved, watching, waiting, not yet stepping forward. It knew this was not the final fight. It knew the city was only testing its survival, and soon the true horrors would follow. Chapter 9. The Long Night. The war did not end quickly. The creatures came in waves, pouring through the city as the darkness stretched beyond the horizon, swallowing hope with every passing hour. Torches burned, flames roared, but it was never enough. Every hollow tendril that fell brought more. Every oil walker that burned screamed, but did not stop the ones that followed. Soldiers died. Citizens fell. Some fought until their hands shook, until their lungs bled, until they knew they would not live to see the morning. And then, as the night reached its darkest point, something new came. Something that had not stepped forward before. A brute. The creature that wasn't meant to exist. The ground shook beneath its weight. A hulking beast, its form twisted, layered in muscle and bone, shifting as if it could barely hold itself together. It had no eyes, only deep fissures in its face, as if something had once clawed them out, leaving behind only the scent of death. And when it roared, the air itself trembled. The moment it entered the city, everything changed. Blades failed. The brute did not bleed properly. It did not stop. It was not a soldier. It was a force of destruction, something meant to tear through defenses, meant to break civilizations down to nothing. And for the first time since the war began, Del wondered if this was a fight he would not win. The battle against the brute. The rebels struck fast, their movements refined by hours of battle, but it did not matter. The first warrior fell instantly, his body shattered, his ribs folding inward like brittle stone. The second was crushed, slammed into the walls with inhuman force, leaving nothing behind but the memory of his name. Del stepped forward, his blade drawn, his breath steady, despite the weight of knowing this might be the end. The brute moved, its hulking arms swiping, tearing into the streets like they were made of paper, forcing Del to dodge, to move faster than he had ever moved before. And then, fire. Flare hurled a torch, landing it against the brute's exposed muscle, watching as it sizzled as the creature twitched violently. It did not die, but it reacted. Fire was the answer, but it would take more. The kill that should not have been possible. Del did not hesitate. He grabbed an oil-soaked cloth, wrapped it around his blade, and lit it ablaze. Then he struck. The first cut did nothing. The second forced the creature to roar. And the third, it tore through its spine, ripping apart whatever kept it standing. The brute collapsed, its body folding into the earth, its weight sending cracks through the streets. The night was breaking. The war had not ended, but the sun was finally rising. The aftermath. The creatures retreated at the first sign of daylight, slipping back into the shadows that had birthed them. The city stood, weakened, bloody, wounded, but not broken. The battle had been won, but the war had only just begun. And somewhere, far beyond the city's walls, the darkness watched, knowing it had not yet revealed its true army. Chapter 10. The Path into Nothing. The fires still burned. The city of bones had survived the first assault, but at a cost. The dead lay where the streets had been their battleground. The wounded clutched their bleeding limbs, and the air carried the weight of a battle that had only just begun. Del stood at the center of it all, his body aching, his mind buzzing with the truth he could no longer ignore. The city could not wait for the next attack. They had to move first. The decision that would change everything. The darkness had sent its creatures, and when Del crushed the hollow tendril, the mist had risen, drifting north, carried by an unseen force. That meant something. That meant the darkness had a place, a territory, a seat of power waiting beyond the city's reach. He could not sit and wait for it to come again. He had to find it. He had to know what they were truly fighting.
The city holds for now,
Del murmured, his gaze fixed on the horizon.
but I can't fight blind. Not again.
Flare frowned.
You barely survived last night, and now you want to charge into whatever hell that mist disappeared into.
Silas remained silent, but his grip on his truncheon tightened. He knew Del had already made his decision.
I won't go alone.
Del said.
A small group. We find the source, the truth, whatever is waiting beyond the wastes. The rest of you stay and make sure this city doesn't fall before I come back.
Flare exhaled sharply, but she nodded.
Then take the ones who won't slow you down.
The expedition begins. As the city licked its wounds, Del gathered his team, a handful of warriors, ones who had proven themselves in the chaos, ones who would not hesitate if the shadows shifted against them. The path north was long, a stretch of barren land that had once been something more, now reduced to nothing but emptiness and ruin. The mist had traveled miles upon miles, beyond the reach of the city, towards something waiting in the distance, something that had no place in the mortal world. The beginning of the barren region. The further they moved, the less the land resembled reality. Grass had withered into ashen strands, untouched by wind. Rocks stood jagged, forming spires that should not exist naturally. And the sun, fading, weak, as if afraid to shine upon whatever lay ahead. The grey tower had anchored horrors across time itself. And now, Del was walking toward one of them. Chapter 11. The Road That Wasn't Meant to Be Walked. Del and his group moved north, leaving the city of bones behind, walking toward the unseen presence that had waited beyond the horizon. The land changed as they went. Not naturally, not with time, but with something deeper, something that had already begun to reject them. 1. The road that doesn't lead back. The first sign came too late. They had been walking for hours when one of them, the youngest, Jorah, a scout, turned back, intending to mark the ground so they could retrace their steps if needed. But when he stepped backward, when he looked at the path they had come from, it wasn't the same. Not entirely. Rocks had shifted slightly, paths twisted at angles that weren't right. Even the mountains on the horizon, once clear behind them, were now lower, as if the land had reshaped itself while they had walked forward. They tried again, turned around, walked back 5 steps, then 10, and nothing brought them back. Only forward, only deeper, only closer to the tower that should not exist. 2. The corpses that move when unseen. They stopped for rest at the edge of a ravine where something had been left behind. Bodies, scattered, broken by time, long dead. Or at least, they should have been. Flare eyed them cautiously as she sat beside the fire, keeping herself alert despite the exhaustion setting in. But it was Silas who noticed first. The corpse closest to him, a skeletal husk, its ribs jagged, its fingers curled in frozen agony, was different than before. Not because it had moved, but because it was facing him now. He stood abruptly, his grip tightening around his truncheon, scanning the other bodies. They were different too. Not much, not obviously, but slightly altered, as if someone had shifted their positions the moment they stopped looking at them. No one slept that night. 3. The voices that don't belong to the living. 2 nights later, the whispers began. Not speech, not human language, but something felt more than heard, pressing into their bones, sinking into their minds. They traveled along the ground, the sound threading itself into the silence, turning the space around them into something else entirely. Jorah clutched his dagger. Flare refused to show fear. Silas didn't move, but his grip on his weapon was tight enough to crack the leather around its hilt. Del simply listened. Because he knew they were walking towards something that had already seen them, already known they were coming, already waiting for them at the tower's throne. 4. The wrong light in the distance. At dawn, when exhaustion had left them weaker, they spotted a campfire ahead. The first sign of human life since they had left the city. They approached cautiously, slow, steady, knowing what the journey had already done to them. But the closer they got, the less real it became. No movement, no voices. And then, nothing. The fire was never there, just empty ground. Something had wanted them to come closer, and they had. 5. The first creatures from the tower. They reached the barren region's final edge, where the land stopped being recognizable, where time felt stretched and incorrect. And then, they were not alone. Something waited, watching, shifting beneath the shadows of towering structures that had never been built by human hands. A creature sentient, its form undefined, flickering between recognition and rejection, its body half in this world, half in something else entirely. It did not approach. It simply waited. Because they would not leave. They would only walk forward. And soon, they would reach the tower itself. And then, only those meant to see its truth would survive. Chapter 12. The Price of Passage. The tower loomed ahead, a structure that had existed beyond time, an anchor across eras, universes, and histories. And now, it stood before Dell and his survivors, waiting to decide who was worthy to enter. But it would not let them pass freely. Something had watched them since they crossed into the barren region. The Guardian, not a creature, not a force, but something older, something tied to the tower itself, something that had known countless arrivals before them, and none had ever entered without sacrifice. The deal that could not be refused. The Guardian did not speak with a mouth. It spoke within their minds, threading its voice through their thoughts, pressing into their skulls as if it had always been there, waiting for them to recognize it.
Two must be given. One I shall take.
The words were not a choice. Not truly. The tower had its rules, and those who defied them did not live to tell the tale. Dell felt his pulse slow, his breath steady despite the weight of what he already knew would happen next. Silas tensed, his face unreadable, but his grip shook against his truncheon. Flare stared, unmoving. And then the Guardian decided. The death that shattered them. Flare's body lifted, her feet rising from the earth, her form dragged effortlessly into the air, held in the grip of something that was not flesh, not reality, but something that defied existence itself. There was no fight, no plea, just the sound of bones snapping, clean, sudden, final. Her body crumpled inward, folding into itself as the Guardian took its sacrifice, as the tower accepted its toll. Silas let out a sound that was not meant to be heard, something raw, broken, a grief turned into fury, into purpose, into the unshakable need to destroy the thing that had taken her. And Dell? Dell did not flinch, because he knew, deep in his bones, that this was only the first cost. There would be more before the end. The tower awaits. They stepped forward, the ones who remained, the ones who had been allowed to continue. The door opened, leading them into the unknown, into the war against the darkness that had lived long before them. And though Flare's body lay broken behind them, her name would not be forgotten, because Silas would never let it be. Chapter 13. The Last Death Before the Door. The tower loomed, its presence a weight upon existence itself, bending reality beneath its unseen force. The survivors moved forward, but they were not all meant to step inside. One more would die before the threshold, before the true horror began. And then, only Silas and Dell would face the darkness itself, the last loss. The air grew heavier as they approached, their steps slowing, their bodies resisting the invisible force that tried to keep them from reaching the entrance. Then the ground shifted. Not a quake, not a collapse. Something else, a ripple through existence, a moment of wrongness, a shift between what should be and what wasn't meant to be. And in that moment, one of them was taken. The body twisted, contorted, pulled into the unseen, shredded before the others could react, before any weapon could be raised. It was not a battle. It was a judgment. The tower had chosen, inside, the battle that was always meant to fail. Silas and Dell stepped forward, past the last remnants of fear, past the threshold where nothing should be alive. The darkness waited. It did not attack immediately, because it knew. This battle was not meant to be won. The idol, the moment, everything changed. The fight was merciless. Every strike failed. Every blow was undone before it even landed. The darkness did not die. And then Silas saw it, the throne, and the idol resting upon it. He did not hesitate. He grabbed it, the weight of it sinking into his flesh, into his bones, into his very existence. The darkness reacted immediately. It merged with him, threading itself into his veins, his thoughts, his soul. And now, Silas was both its tether and its only weakness. The war had not ended. It had only changed. The city of Bones had prepared for battle. Del had walked into the barren region seeking answers. But now, the war was not just against the darkness. Now, the war was inside Silas himself. Chapter 14. The Last Sacrifice. Silas could feel it, the war inside him, the struggle between the man he had been and the force that now lived within him, threading itself through his veins, pressing against his thoughts, trying to become him. But he would not let it win, because he knew there was only one way to end this war, and it was through death. His own, the final choice. Del stood before him, his body stiff, his blade trembling in his grip, his face carrying the weight of everything they had lost. Silas did not hesitate.
You have to do it.
He said, his voice firm, final.
There's no other way.
The darkness clawed at him, whispering promises, threats, illusions, but he ignored them all.
I'll take it with me.
Del shook his head, his hands shaking, his breath uneven.
Silas,
There's no time to fight about this.
Silas closed his eyes. He reached deep inside himself, gathered every last fragment of the darkness, forced it inward, pulled it away from the world, away from the tower, away from the city that did not deserve to suffer for this war any longer. His body changed, twisting, becoming something less human, something that was no longer him. And in that moment, the precise instant he fully gave himself to the monster inside, Del struck. The blade that ended a war. Steel pierced flesh. Silas did not scream. He did not fight. He simply let go. The darkness roared, the tower trembled, reality fractured beneath the weight of its death. And then, Silas was gone. The war had ended. But at what cost? The last survivor. Del stood alone, his blade slick with the blood of the only friend he had left, his breath ragged, his eyes burning with the weight of what had just happened. There was no celebration, no victory. Only loss, only legend, only the memory of the being they had stopped, the thing that would never be fully understood, the force that would only ever exist in whispers. The darkness was gone, and Silas with it. Epilogue. The Last Dawn. The grave stood in silence, freshly carved into the earth, filled with the remains of those who had walked this path only to never return. Del stood above them, his body stiff, his eyes distant, his breath slow as the weight of what had happened pressed into him. The gray tower loomed, watching, waiting. But it no longer ruled this place. Because for the first time in eons, the sun rose. Light spread over the barren region, casting its glow upon the ruins, stretching toward the slopes, touching the tower itself, a place that had never known its warmth. And Del? He turned away, stepped forward, walked into the distance, far beyond the tower, far beyond the memories left buried beneath its shadow, far away from the friends who had died for a war that should never have existed. He did not look back. because if he did, he knew he would never leave. And so, under the first sunlight the tower had seen in countless lifetimes, Dell disappeared into the horizon. Alone, but alive. Author's note: the legend that will not fade. 2 books, 2 stories forged in blood, fire, and sacrifice. What began as a battle against hunger, a fight for identity, survival, and freedom, became something far greater, a war against the eternal, against a force that had existed long before Dell, long before the City of Bones, long before time itself. This second book, Darkness, was never meant to be a simple continuation. It was meant to be a reckoning. It has changed everything, connecting threads that will shape the future, the Grey Tower, the truths hidden within legend, the echoes of wars yet to come. And in the end, the cost of victory was as brutal as the war itself. Silas made the ultimate sacrifice. Dell walked away, not triumphant, not whole, but alive, carrying the weight of something that will never fully leave him. But this is not the end, because the world does not forget legends like this. The City of Bones remains. The Grey Tower exists across all eras, all universes, all stories. And somewhere, beyond what can be seen, the echoes of the darkness linger, waiting for the day someone dares to walk this path again. For now, this chapter is closed. But the universe? It is only just beginning.